The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of species gathered for what many believed would be their final emergency session. The massive crystalline structure orbited the neutral moon of Kepler, 442c, its transparent walls offering a haunting view of the war-torn systems beyond. Ships bearing the dark crimson sigils of the void hegemony could be seen in the distance, their formations like hungry predators circling wounded prey. Admiral Zexhai of the Altarian Defense Fleet stood before the assembled delegates, her four arms gesturing frantically as she delivered the latest casualty reports. Her blue-scaled skin had taken on an ashen hue, a clear sign of exhaustion among her people. The hegemony has taken the Vega sector. 17 billion souls lost in 3 standard days. At this rate, they will reach the core worlds within a lunar cycle. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, each species expressing their fear in their own way. The insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in rapid succession, while the gaseous Etherians pulsed between colors that had no names in most languages. Fear was universal, even if its expression was not. "Order! Order!" boomed Chancellor Korath, the massive rock-like being who had led the council for over 2 centuries. His voice carried the weight of mountains, and, gradually, the chamber fell silent. "We have gathered here not to panic, but to find solutions. Fleet Commander Veldar, report on our defensive capabilities." The reptilian commander's report was grim. The combined fleets of the Council's member species numbered in the hundreds of thousands, but they were scattered across dozens of sectors, many already engaged in desperate holding actions against hegemony advance forces. The enemy possessed technology that seemed to defy known physics. Ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that aged their targets to dust in seconds, and, worst of all, the ability to corrupt entire star systems, turning them into twisted mockeries of their former selves. "Perhaps," came a tentative voice from the back of the chamber, "we should consider the old legends." The speaker was Dr. Nwaitichere, a crystalline scholar whose species was known for their perfect memory and vast libraries of historical data. Her translucent form shimmered nervously as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. "Legends." Admiral Zexhai's tone carried obvious skepticism. "Doctor, with respect, this is hardly the time for academic pursuits." "The Terran Codex," Dr. Nwaitichere continued, her voice growing stronger. "The stories speak of a species that once fought beings similar to the hegemony. Warriors from a blue world called Earth, led by creatures calling themselves humans. The texts describe impossible feats, beings who could survive in the vacuum of space, who fought with such ferocity that their enemies would flee at the mere mention of their name." A rumble of what sounded suspiciously like laughter rippled through the chamber. The fox-like Reinardians were particularly vocal in their amusement, their high-pitched barks echoing off the crystal walls. "Fairy tales," scoffed Commander Veldar. "Every species has legends of mythical warriors. The Altarians speak of the sky dancers. The Zephyrians have their hive destroyers. These are stories told to younglings, nothing more." But Dr. Nwaitichere was not deterred. "The Codex is different. It contains star charts, technological specifications, even genetic profiles. If these humans are myth, then why do the records span 17 different civilizations across 12 galactic sectors? Why do they all describe the same physical characteristics, the same impossible endurance, the same tactical brilliance?" Chancellor Korath raised one massive stone hand, and the chamber fell silent once more. "Even if we entertain this possibility, Doctor, the Terran Codex dates back over 3,000 years. If this species ever existed, they are surely extinct by now." "Not extinct," came another voice, this one crackling with electronic interference. The speaker was Axiom 7, the representative of the synthetic collective. The artificial being's holographic form flickered as data streams flowed visibly through its transparent body. Cross-referencing galactic survey data with the star charts from the Terran Codex reveals a 97.3% probability match with the Sol system. located in what your species call the Orion Arm. The revelation sent a new wave of murmurs through the chamber. The Orion Arm was considered a galactic backwater, filled with primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. Most Council species avoided the region entirely, viewing it as beneath their notice. We have survey data from that region. The dominant species in the Sol system barely achieved chemical propulsion when we last checked. They were still fighting wars with projectile weapons and chemical explosives. When was this survey conducted? Dr. NYTHRA asked, her crystalline form brightening with what her species called hope resonance. Admiral Zexhai consulted her datapad, her expression growing troubled. Standard year 2187. That would be nearly 4 centuries ago. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. 400 years was a significant span, even by galactic standards. Species could evolve rapidly when necessity demanded it, and the gulf between chemical propulsion and faster-than-light travel had been bridged by some civilizations in far less time. I propose we investigate, Dr. Whitechura said, her voice carrying new authority. A small reconnaissance mission to the Sol system. If the humans still exist, if they have developed, as the legends suggest, perhaps they could provide assistance. If not, we will have lost only time we can ill afford to waste. And if these mythical humans prove to be as primitive as our surveys indicated, Commander Veldhar's skepticism was palpable. We would be asking Stone Age primitives to fight a war that our most advanced civilizations are losing. Before Dr. NYTHRA could respond, the chamber's warning systems activated. Red lights bathed the assembly as urgent alerts filled the air. A massive holographic display materialized above the central dais, showing a real-time tactical readout of a Sirius system. The impossible was happening before their eyes. The hegemony's advanced fleet, which had been locked in a siege of the Sirius defense grid for weeks, was retreating. Not withdrawing in good order, not regrouping for another assault, but fleeing in apparent panic. The massive dark ships that had seemed invincible were scattering like frightened animals. What could cause such a retreat? Chancellor Korath demanded, his rocky form leaning forward to study the display more closely. Unknown vessels detected entering the Sirius system, reported the chamber's AI. Configuration does not match any known design in Council databases. Energy signatures are unusual. The display zoomed in on the newcomers, and the assembled delegates gasped in unison. The ships were unlike anything they had ever seen, sleek, angular vessels that seemed to blur at the edges, as if reality itself had trouble containing them. They moved with impossible grace, weaving between hegemony formations and leaving destruction in their wake. But it was not the ships themselves that caught Dr. NYTHRA's attention. It was the markings on their hulls, symbols that matched exactly those described in the most ancient passages of the Terran Codex. The humans, she whispered, her crystalline form blazing with excitement. They're already here. Admiral Zexhai was frantically coordinating with the Sirius Defense Command, trying to make sense of the tactical situation. The Sirius defenders are reporting that these unknown vessels appeared without warning. They engaged the hegemony fleet immediately, displaying tactical knowledge that should be impossible for newcomers to possess. Requesting communication with the unknown vessels came a transmission from Sirius Command. The response came immediately, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect galactic standard, though with an accent none had heard before. The voice was calm, confident, and carried an undertone that made even the battle-hardened representatives of the Council straighten in their seats. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Federation Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress calls and came as quickly as possible. The Sirius defense grid is now secure. We're ready to discuss terms of alliance against the Void hegemony. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates demanded explanations, tactical assessments, and proof of identity. But Dr. NYTHRA simply smiled, her crystalline form pulsing with vindicated triumph. The legends spoke of their greatest strength, she said to Chancellor Korith, her voice cutting through the noise. Not their technology, not their weapons, but their ability to appear when hope seemed lost, to turn the tide when all seemed lost. As if summoned by her words, the main display shifted to show a close-up of one of the mysterious human vessels. Through the transparent aluminum of what appeared to be a bridge section, figures could be seen moving with purposeful efficiency. They were bipedal, roughly humanoid in shape, but there was something about their bearing, their coordination, that spoke of a species forged by conflict. Admiral Chun. Chancellor Korith's voice boomed across the communication channel. You claim to represent humanity. The Terran Codex speaks of your species as warriors of legend. We had begun to believe you were myth. The humans' laughter was rich and warm, carrying a note of genuine amusement. Myth has a way of becoming reality when necessity demands it. Chancellor, we've been watching the hegemonies advance for some time. We know what they are, what they do to the worlds they conquer. We couldn't stand by and let that happen to our neighbors. Neighbors, Commander Veltar interjected. The Council has no record of formal contact with your species. Formal contact? No, Admiral Chen agreed. But we've been trading with various rim world civilizations for decades. Independent colonies, research stations, merchant guilds that prefer to operate outside Council jurisdiction. You might be surprised how much one can learn by simply listening. The tactical display showed the hegemony fleet continuing its retreat, but, more ominously, it revealed the true scale of their forces. What the Council had been fighting was merely the advance guard. The main hegemony armada numbered in the millions of vessels, a dark tide that could sweep across the galaxy like a plague. Even if your intervention at Sirius was remarkable, Admiral Zexhai said, her tone respectful but cautious. The full hegemony fleet outnumbers your visible forces by orders of magnitude. How can humanity hope to stand against such overwhelming numbers? Admiral Chen's image leaned forward slightly, and, for a moment, the assembled delegates caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that made them understand why the legends spoke of humans with such awe. It was not fear or resignation, but a cold, calculating intelligence backed by an unshakable determination. Admiral, you're making the same mistake the hegemony made, she said quietly. You're assuming you can see our full strength. Humanity learned long ago that the best battles are won before the enemy realizes they're fighting. As if to punctuate her words, the long-range sensors throughout the chamber began detecting new contacts. At first, it was dozens of ships appearing at the edge of various systems. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Each group bore the same angular design as Admiral Chen's vessels, and each moved with the same purposeful grace. How many? Chancellor Korith asked, his ancient voice carrying a note of wonder. Enough, Admiral Chun replied simply. The question is not whether humanity can help in this war, Chancellor. The question is whether the Council is ready to fight alongside us. Because this isn't going to be a war of attrition or defensive actions. We're going to take the fight directly to the hegemony, to the source of their power. And we're going to end this threat once and for all. Dr. NYTHR's crystalline form pulsed with excitement as she accessed the most ancient files in the Terran Codex. The passages she had memorized spoke not just of human warriors, but of their philosophy of warfare. They did not simply fight to survive or defend. They fought to ensure that their enemies could never threaten anyone again. The Codex mentioned something called the Terran Doctrine, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Total victory through total commitment. No half measures. No compromise with forces of destruction. Indeed, Admiral Chun confirmed. The Void Hegemony doesn't just conquer worlds. They corrupt them, twist them into something unrecognizable. They turn beauty into horror, hope into despair. This isn't a war for territory or resources. This is a war for the very soul of the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For months, the Council had been fighting a defensive war, trying to minimize losses, preserve what they could. the humans were proposing something far more dangerous, but potentially far more decisive. "What would you need from us?" Chancellor Korath asked, his tone suggesting he had already made his decision. "Everything," Admiral Chun replied without hesitation. "Your fleets, your knowledge, your industrial capacity, your warriors. In return, we offer you something the Council has forgotten how to achieve." "Which is?" Admiral Chen's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as confident. "Victory." As the chamber erupted in debate and discussion, Dr. Nythera found herself studying the human vessels on the tactical display. The legends had spoken of humanity's greatest strength being their refusal to accept defeat, their ability to find hope in the darkest situations. Looking at the impossible grace with which their ships moved, the casual confidence with which they had scattered a hegemony fleet, she began to understand that the legends had, if anything, understated the truth. The war was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. The age of defensive positions and strategic withdrawals was over. Humanity had entered the war, and they brought with them the promise of something the galaxy had not seen in generations, the possibility of not just surviving the darkness, but driving it back forever. The real question was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for what that would require of them. The first joint tactical briefing between the Council forces and humanity took place aboard the human flagship Indomitable, a vessel that defied every convention of galactic ship design. Where Council ships were built for specific purposes, war vessels angular and aggressive, science ships graceful and flowing, the Indomitable seemed to embody all possibilities at once. Its hull shifted between configurations as Dr. Nythera watched, adapting to different operational requirements with fluid precision. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before a three-dimensional holographic display that showed the entire galaxy, red markers indicating hegemony-controlled systems spreading like an infection across the outer rim. Council representatives filled the briefing room, their various forms creating a tableau that would have been impossible to imagine just days before. The hegemony's strength lies in their ability to corrupt rather than simply conquer, Admiral Chun began, her words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages by technology that seemed to understand context and emotion as well as mere vocabulary. They don't want your worlds for resources or strategic position. They want to transform them into something else entirely. Commander Veldar, his reptilian features twisted in confusion, gestured toward the display. "Our intelligence suggests they seek to expand their territory like any conventional empire. They establish bases, extract resources, conscript populations." "That's just the surface," interrupted a new voice. The speaker was Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, a human whose scarred features spoke of battles fought in places the Council had never heard of. "Commander, with respect, your intelligence is based on what you can observe from a distance. We've been inside hegemony space. We've seen what they really do." The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a system that had been marked as lost for over a year. What the assembled delegates saw made several of them recoil in horror. The planets still existed, but they had been fundamentally altered. Where once there had been blue oceans, crimson seas now churned with unnatural tides. The very geometry of the worlds seemed wrong, as if space itself had been twisted into uncomfortable angles. "This was the Arcturus colony," Colonel Rodriguez continued, his voice steady despite the obvious pain the images caused him. 2 billion Canthari civilians, known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and artistic achievements. The hegemony didn't kill them. They transformed them. New images appeared, beings that might once have been Canthari, but now moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their beautiful crystalline skin replaced by something that hurt to look at directly. They worked with mindless efficiency at tasks that seemed to serve no logical purpose, building structures that followed no known architectural principles. "They're still alive," Admiral Chin said quietly. "Still conscious, still aware of what they've become. But they can no longer remember what they once were. The hegemony doesn't just take worlds. They steal the very concept of what those words meant. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a war for territory or resources, but something far more fundamental. The hegemony was attacking the very nature of reality itself. "How do we fight something like that?" asked Chancellor Korith, his ancient voice carrying a weight of despair that made the assembled delegates shift uncomfortably. "By remembering who we are," replied Admiral Chun, "and by refusing to let them change us." Dr. Nythr leaned forward, her crystalline form pulsing with urgent questions. "The Terran Codex speaks of humanity's resistance to alteration. The legends say your species cannot be corrupted by forces that would twist other beings. Is this true?" Admiral Chun exchanged glances with Colonel Rodriguez before answering. "Humans have unique psychological structures. We've encountered corruption attempts before, from various sources throughout our history. Something in our mental architecture seems to resist external modification. We don't understand it completely, but it's been verified through extensive testing. That's why the hegemony fears you," said Axiom 7, the synthetic being's holographic form flickering with rapid data analysis. Cross-referencing their retreat patterns with appearance of human forces shows 94.7% correlation with complete withdrawal from contested systems. They've encountered humanity before. Commander Veldar's question carried urgent implications. Colonel Rodriguez nodded grimly. 3 centuries ago, at the edge of what you call the Perseus Arm, we'd just achieved faster-than-light travel. We're exploring systems beyond our own. We found something. An advanced scout probe from what we now know was the hegemony. The display shifted again, showing archive footage that made several delegates step backward. A massive dark structure, seemingly built from crystallized shadow, hung in space above a dead world. Around it, smaller vessels moved with the same unnatural geometry that characterized all hegemony technology. First contact protocols called for peaceful interaction, Admiral Chin continued. We sent a diplomatic vessel, the Marco Polo, crewed by our best and brightest. What came back? She paused, her composure cracking slightly. What came back wasn't the same ship, wasn't the same crew. They spoke our language, carried our identification, but everything else was wrong. They moved wrong, thought wrong, existed wrong. What did you do? Dr. Nythr asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. We destroyed them, Colonel Rodriguez said flatly. No hesitation, no attempt at treatment or reversal. Complete obliteration. Then we hunted down every trace of hegemony presence in that system and eliminated it. The hegemony learned that day that humans couldn't be converted, Admiral Chun continued. But, more importantly, they learned that we would kill our own people rather than let them be used against us. To a species that depends on corruption and subversion, that level of resolve was incomprehensible. Admiral Zexhai had been studying the tactical implications with growing excitement. That's why they retreat from human forces. They can't corrupt you, can't turn your strength against you. Their entire strategic doctrine becomes useless. Exactly. But that's also why this war is so critical. Admiral Chin's expression grew deadly serious. The hegemony has spent 3 centuries developing new approaches. They can't corrupt us directly, but they can corrupt everything around us. Every world they take, every species they transform, becomes a weapon pointed at the heart of galactic civilization. The holographic display expanded to show the true scope of hegemony strategy. The red markers representing corrupted systems formed a pattern that was clearly designed to isolate humanity from potential allies. Each conquest had been chosen not for strategic value, but to create psychological pressure on surrounding systems. They're trying to make us choose, Colonel Rodriguez explained. Stand alone and eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, or watch helplessly as they transform the galaxy into something unrecognizable. But you're not standing alone. Chancellor Korth's voice carried new strength. The Council stands with you. With respect, Chancellor, Admiral Chin's tone was diplomatic but firm. The Council can't fight this war the way you've been fighting it. Defensive positions, strategic withdrawals, acceptable losses. These concepts don't apply when facing an enemy like the hegemony. Then, how do we fight them? Commander Veldar's question carried genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Like humans fight, Colonel Rodriguez answered with a grim smile. We hit them where they don't expect it, with everything we have, and we don't stop until they're extinct. Dr. and White HRA accessed our memory banks, calling up passages from the deepest archives of the Terran Codex. The doctrine of total war, she said slowly. Complete commitment to complete victory. No compromise, no negotiation, no acceptance of anything less than the enemy's absolute destruction. The ancient text described this as humanity's ultimate strength and greatest weakness, she continued. Once committed to a course of action, humans cannot be turned from it by any external force. They will sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to achieve their goals. It's not a weakness, Admiral Chen said quietly. It's a choice. When faced with an enemy that represents an existential threat to everything we value, there's no middle ground. The hegemony must be destroyed completely, or they will eventually destroy everything else. The weight of that statement settled over the assembled delegates like a physical force. They had been fighting to minimize losses, to preserve what they could of their civilizations. The humans were proposing something far more dangerous, risking everything in the hope of saving everything. What would this total war look like? Asked Chancellor Korth. Admiral Chun gestured, and the holographic display transformed into a new configuration. Human fleet positions appeared throughout the galaxy, far more extensive than anyone had imagined. But more striking were the Council fleets shown in new formations, integrated with human forces in ways that emphasized speed and decisive action over defensive strength. Phase 1, Disruption, Admiral Chen began. Combined human Council forces hit every major hegemony logistics hub simultaneously. We cut their supply lines, destroy their forward bases, and force them to react defensively. Phase 2, Penetration. We punch through their outer defenses and establish forward operating bases in corrupted space. This is the dangerous part. Council forces will need to operate in environments that are fundamentally hostile to normal consciousness. Phase 3, Decapitation. We locate and destroy the source of hegemony power. Our intelligence suggests they have a central command structure, possibly a single entity that coordinates all their operations. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression grim. This plan will require unprecedented cooperation between our species. Human forces will need to operate Council vessels. Council forces will need to adapt to human tactical doctrines. More importantly, everyone will need to be prepared for psychological warfare on a scale none of us have experienced. What do you mean? Admiral Zexhai asked, though her tone suggested she was already beginning to understand. The hegemony will try to break your minds before they break your ships, Admiral Chen explained. They'll show you visions of your homeworlds transformed, your families corrupted, your cultures twisted into abominations. They'll offer you compromises, partial victories, anything to make you hesitate at the crucial moment. And when that happens, Colonel Rodriguez continued, you'll need to remember what we're fighting for. Not just survival, not just victory, but the right of every species to remain what they choose to be. Dr. NYTHera felt something she had never experienced before, a resonance between her own crystalline consciousness and the iron determination radiating from the human officers. The Codex speaks of this, she said wonderingly. The human gift for inspiring other species to exceed their perceived limitations. It's not a gift, Admiral Chun corrected gently. It's a choice. Every being in this room has the capacity for absolute determination. The question is whether you're willing to embrace it. Axiom 7's holographic form flickered with rapid calculations. Probability analysis of proposed strategy shows 73.2% chance of total victory against 26.8% chance of catastrophic failure. No intermediate outcomes are mathematically possible. That's the nature of total war, Admiral Chen agreed. We win everything or lose everything. There's no middle ground. The chamber fell silent as each delegate contemplated the magnitude of what was being proposed. They had spent months fighting a grinding war of attrition, accepting losses as inevitable, hoping to preserve something of their civilizations. Now they were being asked to risk it all on a single, decisive campaign. I need to understand something, Admiral Zexhai said finally. Why are humans willing to take these risks for species they've never formally met? What do you gain from our survival? Admiral Chan was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the chamber's walls. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone present lean forward. 3 centuries ago, we found something in our databases that changed how humanity sees the galaxy. Buried in our oldest archives, we discovered records of species that tried to help Earth during our darkest period. Messages sent across interstellar space, offering aid, friendship, hope. We were too primitive to respond, too isolated to accept help. But someone somewhere in the galaxy saw a young species struggling to survive and reached out anyway. We never learned who they were, but we never forgot the gesture. She turned to face the assembled delegates, her expression carrying the weight of centuries of human determination. Today, every one of you represents the possibility that we're finally advanced enough to return the favor. The galaxy reached out to us when we needed help. Now it's our turn to reach back. The silence that followed was different from before. It carried not uncertainty, but the weight of decision. Chancellor Korath was the first to speak, his ancient voice carrying new strength. The Council accepts humanity's proposal for total war against the Void hegemony. All member species will commit their full military capacity to this effort. One by one, the other delegates added their agreement. Admiral Zexhai offered the Altarian Defense Fleet. Commander Veldar pledged the combined reptilian armadas. Even the cautious Etherians agreed to provide their powerful but fragile vessels. Then, it's decided, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying satisfaction and grim determination in equal measure. Operation Prometheus begins in 72 hours. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings, we're going to war. As the delegates dispersed to prepare their forces, Dr. Nytichara remained behind, studying the tactical displays with growing excitement. The Terran Codex had spoken of humanity's greatest strength, but she was beginning to understand that it wasn't their technology, their tactics, or even their resistance to corruption. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat, combined with an infinite capacity to inspire others to the same level of determination. The hegemony had made a critical error when they chose to threaten the galaxy. They had awakened not just humanity, but the human potential that lay dormant in every species capable of choosing to fight rather than surrender. The war was about to enter a new phase, one that would test not just military might, but the fundamental resolve of every conscious being in the galaxy. The age of defensive warfare was over. The age of human warfare was about to begin. Operation Prometheus began with a silence that stretched across 17 star systems simultaneously. For exactly 1 standard hour, every communication channel, every sensor array, every monitoring station in hegemony space detected nothing. No fleet movements, no weapon signatures, no energy readings of any kind. To the corrupted beings that served as the hegemony's eyes and ears, it appeared as though the combined forces of humanity and the Council had simply vanished. Then, reality exploded. Aboard the Altarian cruiser Storm's Edge, now integrated into the human tactical network, Admiral Zexhai watched in stunned amazement as coordinated strikes erupted across the hegemony's outer perimeter. The precision was unlike anything she had witnessed in decades of military service. Human vessels appeared from what seemed like empty space, delivered devastating attacks with surgical precision, and vanished again before defensive systems could respond. "How are they doing this?" she asked Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, the human tactical officer who had been assigned to help integrate Altarian forces with human command structures. Spatial fold technology, Kim explained, her fingers dancing across control surfaces that had been reconfigured to accommodate both species' operating preferences. We've been developing it for the past century, but this is its first large-scale deployment. Reality is more flexible than most species assume. The tactical display showed hegemony forces reeling from attacks that seemed to come from impossible angles. Supply convoys found themselves under assault from vessels that materialized inside their defensive formations. Command centers discovered human boarding parties appearing directly in their most secure sections. Most unnerving of all, hegemony vessels began reporting that their corrupted crews were somehow remembering who they had been before their transformation. "That's not possible," Admiral Zexheim muttered, watching a former Canthery dreadnought suddenly change course and begin attacking its own fleet. Hegemony corruption is irreversible. The neural pathways are completely rewritten. Irreversible by conventional means, Kim agreed. But humans have been studying consciousness for millennia. We've learned that identity isn't just stored in neural patterns. It exists in quantum structures that are much harder to alter permanently. On the display, more hegemony vessels were breaking formation as their crews underwent what the humans called identity restoration. It wasn't a perfect process. Many of the restored beings died from the shock of remembering what they had become. But enough survived to create chaos in the hegemony ranks. "This is just the beginning," Kim continued. "Phase 2 starts in 18 minutes. 3-star systems away." Colonel Marcus Rodriguez crouched in the twisted corridors of a hegemony processing facility, leading a joint strike team of humans and Council Special Forces. The facility had once been a Zephyrian research station, but the hegemony had transformed it into something that defied description. The walls seemed to breathe, the floor felt uncomfortably warm beneath their feet, and the air itself whispered with voices and languages that had never existed. "Remember your training," Rodriguez whispered into his comm unit, his words automatically translated for the diverse team following him. "Don't look directly at the architecture. Don't listen to the voices. Focus on your mission objectives and your teammates." The Zephyrian commando next to him, a being called Kixthara whose natural clicking had been replaced by determined silence, gave a gesture that translated roughly as understood and ready. The transformation of her people's research station had filled her with a rage that burned cold and precise, exactly the kind of motivation that made for effective special operations. They moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, placing explosive charges at key structural points. But their real objective lay deeper in the central processing chamber where the hegemony conducted their corruption experiments. According to intelligence gathered from restored beings, each facility contained a fragment of the hegemony's core consciousness, a piece of whatever intelligence directed their expansion. "Target acquired," reported Dr. Nwaitichere, who had insisted on joining the mission despite its obvious dangers. Her crystalline form allowed her to interface directly with hegemony technology, translating its twisted logic into forms other species could understand. "The consciousness fragment is contained in a quantum crystalline matrix. I can extract it, but I'll need 15 minutes of uninterrupted access." "You'll have it," Rodriguez promised, and his team spread out to establish a defensive perimeter. The hegemony's response was immediate and horrific. The facility itself seemed to come alive, walls flowing like liquid to block exits, ceiling fixtures sprouting tendrils that sought to ensnare the intruders. Worse, the corrupted beings that serve as guards began to appear, former scientists and researchers whose brilliant minds had been twisted into something that hurt to perceive directly. The battle that followed would have been impossible for any purely council force to win. The hegemony's weapons didn't just damage physical structures, they attacked the very concept of organized resistance. But Rodriguez's team had been specifically chosen and trained for this environment. "Kixthara, Northeast Corridor." Rodriguez shouted, his rifle firing rounds that had been specially designed to disrupt hegemony energy patterns. The Zephyrian commando responded instantly, her natural agility allowing her to navigate the changing geometry of the corrupted facility with impossible grace. A Leonardian demolitions expert named Velcura worked with cold efficiency, his explosive devices somehow maintaining their structural integrity despite reality-warping fields that should have rendered them inert. Charges placed and armed. 60 seconds to extraction. But Dr. Enwhite needed more time. Her crystalline form was interfaced directly with the consciousness fragment, downloading terabytes of data that would reveal the hegemony's true nature and capabilities. The process was dangerous beyond description. Direct contact with hegemony consciousness could corrupt even her resistant mind. I'm reading massive energy buildup, reported their human technical specialist, Corporal Lisa Chun. The facility's about to undergo some kind of transformation. Whatever it's planning, it's big. Rodriguez made the kind of split-second decision that defined human military doctrine. All non-essential personnel, emergency extraction now. Dr. Enwhite, how much more time do you need? 8 minutes, came the strained reply. The crystalline's natural luminescence was flickering erratically as alien thoughts pressed against her consciousness. But if I stop now, we lose everything. Then we hold for 8 minutes, Rodriguez decided. Chun, signal the storm's edge. Tell them we need orbital fire support on our position in exactly 9 minutes. Sir, that will destroy the facility with us still inside. Not if we do our jobs right. What followed was 8 minutes that would become legend among special operations forces throughout the galaxy. Rodriguez's team fought a running battle against enemies that existed partially outside normal space-time, using weapons that had been designed by species that understood warfare as both art and science. They held corridors that tried to twist themselves into mathematical impossibilities, defended positions that existed in quantum superposition, and maintained tactical coherence despite facing opponents that could attack their sanity as easily as their bodies. When Dr. Enwhite finally completed her download and extracted herself from the consciousness fragment, she discovered that her teammates had paid a horrific price. 3 of the Council commandos had been killed, and 2 more were showing signs of progressive corruption that would require immediate medical intervention. Got it, she announced, her crystalline form pulsing with exhaustion. Complete tactical database, command protocols, and she paused, her expression shifting to something approaching horror. And their ultimate objective. We need to get this information to Admiral Chun immediately. Rodriguez didn't waste time with questions. All teams, emergency extraction. Move, move, move. They reached the extraction point just as the facility began its final transformation. The building was becoming something else, something that existed in more dimensions than conventional physics allowed. The rescue shuttles had to use human spatial fold technology to reach them, appearing inside the collapsing structure with precision that defied belief. As they fled toward orbit, the facility's destruction lit up the planet's night side with fires that burned in colors that had no names. But more importantly, the data Dr. Enwhite had extracted began revealing secrets that changed everything the Council thought they knew about the war. Aboard the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Chin studied the downloaded intelligence with growing alarm. The consciousness fragments weren't just command nodes, as they had assumed. They were components of a vast, distributed intelligence, one that spanned multiple galaxies and had been working toward a goal that made their current invasion seem trivial by comparison. They're not trying to conquer the galaxy, she said to the assembled command staff. They're trying to prepare it. Prepare it for what? Asked Chancellor Korath, his ancient voice carrying new undertones of fear. Dr. Enwhite answered, her crystalline form dim with exhaustion and horror. For transformation into a weapon. The consciousness fragments contain references to something called the Quantum Cascade Protocol. They're planning to use our entire galaxy as a component in some kind of multidimensional warfare. Against whom? The question came from Commander Veldar. though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Unknown, Admiral Chen replied. But the intelligence suggests that the void hegemony is fleeing from something, not expanding toward something. They're refugees, and they're planning to use our galaxy as a fortress. The implications sent shockwaves through the assembled officers. Everything they thought they understood about the hegemony's motivations was wrong. They weren't dealing with an aggressive empire, but with something far more dangerous, a species so desperate that they would transform entire galaxies to ensure their survival. This changes our tactical approach, Colonel Rodriguez observed. If they're building defenses, then they have something to defend against, something they fear more than they fear us. Which means, Admiral Chan continued, that simply defeating the hegemony might not be enough. We need to understand what they're running from, and we need to be prepared to face it ourselves. Axiom 7's holographic form flickered with rapid analysis. Cross-referencing astronomical data with intelligence indicates massive disturbances in neighboring galaxies. Energy signatures consistent with warfare on scales that defy comprehension. How massive? Admiral Zexai asked, though her tone suggested she was already beginning to understand. Galaxy scale, the synthetic being replied. Entire star systems being converted to energy. Solar engineering projects that dwarf anything in our understanding. The indications are of warfare between entities that exist on levels we cannot comprehend. The command center fell into stunned silence as the true scope of their situation became clear. The war with the hegemony wasn't the main event. It was merely the opening act in a conflict that spanned multiple galaxies and involved forces beyond their understanding. So what do we do? The question came from a young Etherian officer whose gaseous form was pulsing with barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen's answer carried the weight of human determination tempered by new understanding. We do what we came here to do. We stop the hegemony from corrupting our galaxy. But now we know we need to do it faster, and we need to start preparing for what comes after. The doctrine of total war takes on new meaning, Dr. NYTHR observed. We're not just fighting for victory. We're fighting for the right to face whatever comes next on our own terms. Exactly, Admiral Chen confirmed. Phase 3 of Operation Prometheus begins immediately. All forces, all capabilities, everything we have. We end the hegemony threat now, while we still can. As the assembled officers dispersed to coordinate the largest military operation in galactic history, Dr. NYTHR found herself reflecting on the ancient passages of the Terran Codex. The legends had spoken of humanity's greatest strength being their refusal to accept defeat, but now she understood that it was something deeper. Humans didn't just refuse to lose. They refused to accept limitations on what was possible. When faced with an enemy that commanded galactic scale power, they didn't despair. They adapted. When confronted with threats beyond comprehension, they didn't surrender. They learned. The war with the hegemony was ending, whether the hegemony knew it or not. But the larger conflict, the one that would determine the fate of consciousness itself across multiple galaxies, was just beginning. And for the first time since discovering the true scope of what they faced, Dr. NYTHR felt something approaching hope. Because they weren't facing it alone. They were facing it with humanity, and humanity had never learned how to give up.